The author who has painted the portrait is KHUSHWANT Singh. He is a lawyer, journalist, diplomat, a politician. In this lesson, we are going to discuss two important topics, that is the descending graph of the relationship between the grandmother and his grandson. He was least bothered about picking up the prayer and starting to sing along. No way. He just loved his grandmother singing, and that's what he enjoyed and cherished. A very warm welcome to everyone. This is your prep school English class and I am your English teacher, Kshama. Welcome to your first ever class of class 11th standard. Now today we are setting forth on this journey starting with the first chapter from your Hornbill textbook named The Portrait of a Lady by KHUSHWANT Singh. Let's move on and see what he has in store for us. Now, what are we going to learn in this session is, of course, about the poet, a special bond, the graph, and the summary of this entire lesson. Now, a special bond between who and who? What is the graph about? Let's discover. First up, now you might be wondering, have I landed on the wrong video by any chance? Is it a sketching tutorial? Or are we going to learn painting today? Is KHUSHWANT Singh a famous painter? Something like that? No, sorry to disappoint you. That's not what is happening. Let's see what it is. Today we are going to learn about, first up, KHUSHWANT Singh, the author who has filled colors into the portrait of a lady is none other than the author KHUSHWANT Singh. Now what do we know about him? Let's get to know. The author who has painted the portrait is KHUSHWANT Singh. He is a lawyer, journalist, diplomat, a politician. And most importantly, what inspired him to write one of his famous books, that is The Train to Pakistan in 1956, is the partition of India that happened in the year 1947. Now that is what we know about our author KHUSHWANT Singh. He is still not a painter, right? Nowhere it is mentioned that he is a painter. Then how did he draw the portrait of a lady? It's not literally that he has painted the portrait of a lady. It is through his beautiful collection of words, he has portrayed the picture of his own grandmother. Now you might be wondering, why would anyone name the lesson talking about their own grandmother just a portrait of a lady? Why is it just a lady? It is as though you're talking about somebody else, some third person. Is it so? There's no bond between the two of you? Isn't that what we are here to discuss about? What is happening? Why is it just a portrait of a lady? If you were to write a lesson or a article about your grandmother, it would be titled something like My Sweet Grandmother, Moments with My Grandmother, right? But why is it a portrait of a lady? Doesn't that bother you? Let's see. Now to start with, we are going to discover the colors filled into the portrait of a lady. Colors? Again? Let's see now. Now in this lesson, we are going to discuss two important topics, that is the descending graph of the relationship between the grandmother and his grandson. Okay, now we know that they were friends and the graph is not ascending. I remind you again, it is a descending graph. Something interesting is in store for us. I am excited. I'm sure you are as well. The second point being, we are going to look at the grandmother through the perspective of her grandson. Okay, through his lens, we are going to understand her. What are we going to understand? We are going to understand her holistically. Her behavior, her spiritual preferences, how was she like? What did she look like? Was she an atheist? Was she a theist? What was she? For example, her physical appearance, her daily chores, what did she do on a day-to-day basis? Her spiritual preferences, emotional state, how did she react to things? Every single detail, nuances, we are going to pick it up. Through whose perspective? Through the grandson's perspective. This is what the chapter is about in a nutshell. But we need to dive deep to understand better. Okay? Let's dive deep into what feels like warm pages of a diary. Now, I call it so because the first two pages are truly like you also have grandparents at home, and imagine you describing them in your own words. Imagine you telling us your perspective, or how is it that they look in your eyes. It's so beautiful, right? That is why I call it the warm pages of a diary. Now, what is there in the warm pages of this diary? First up, a short introduction about this grandmother of KHUSHWANT Singh. Grandmother, obviously an old lady, and for the 20 long years he has known her for, you can also see in the picture, she has been this, a very old lady. It feels like she has reached the pinnacle of aging. There is no other level that she can reach after this. She is very old. And there's something else also you need to understand here. For him to think of her in her younger version, in her younger self, felt very bizarre. I mean, this woman, I don't think she ever had a youth. She was ever young. Or to imagine her younger self was very difficult for him. Okay? Is it the same for you as well? Is it difficult for you to imagine your grandparents in their youth? Let's discuss about it later, okay? Now, there's another thing that felt bizarre as well. It felt awkward, it felt bizarre for him to think of her when she told him about her childhood stories, like how she jumped over somebody's house or went to somebody's house to play. All of this felt very awkward, like, I don't think she was ever in her youth. What are you talking about? That's his first impression. Moving forward, we get to know about the grandfather. Now, from meeting the grandmother, we turn towards the drawing room where above the mantelpiece, above the fireplace, we see the portrait of the grandfather being hung. Now, I know it is the grand portrait of a lady that we are talking about, but grandfather is also important, okay? Now, as you see on the screen, how is the grandfather described? The portrait or the photo of the grandfather hung above the mantelpiece is described something like this. He has a big turban on his head, which is a Punjabi turban, I'm sure you have all seen. And he is wearing loose-fitting clothes. And there is his dadi, white moustache, spreading all over his breast, covering the major part of his breast area. Dadi, as we call it, is covering over there, as you can see. Now that is the picture of the grandfather that we get when we move to the drawing room. Now about his grandfather also, he has the same idea. I mean, this guy was also born to have just grandchildren, and I don't think he was also ever in his youth. It felt so to him because he has seen him for the past 20 years with this wrinkled face, old age picture. Now, in order to replace that from a younger version, it was very difficult for our KHUSHWANT Singh. Moving forward, we are now going to picturize the grandmother. Now, KHUSHWANT Singh has picturized his grandmother. He wants you also to imagine and picturize her. That is why he has given a set of descriptions for us to be able to be easier to picturize her. Now, what does he say? He says, she is a short, fat, a little stout and bent person, and she hobbled around the house like this. Hobbling is walking with a lot of difficulty. So one hand of hers was on her waist and another constantly telling the beads. She was chanting and doing her prayers all the time. One hand on the waist and the other telling the beads, and she used to hobble around the house with great difficulty. She used to walk around the house, and she was short and a little fat. Okay, that is the first impression of the grandmother that we are getting. Now, what else do we know about the grandmother? She hobbled in spotless white. Now, we know that grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece. He has passed away. So, grandmother is obviously wearing a spotless white, and about her one hand resting on the waist, another hand telling the beads, chanting the prayer. That also we got to know. Another hand busy telling the rosary. And it was as though she is a completely spiritualistic person. She constantly counted the beads, told the rosary, chanted the prayers all the time. Okay. Now, this is a very beautiful comparison that the author makes over here. She is compared to a winter landscape in the mountain. I mean, the serene, picturesque idea of the comparison that is made over here is such a beautiful one, so to say. When she hobbled around the house in pure white, to look at her with that rosary and a hand trying to balance the stoop, she seemed like this beautiful picture of the winter landscape mountains. It was very calming. It was very soothing to just look at her. I mean, when your grandparents walk around the house, is it not just so soothing, so comforting to have them around. I mean, when he looked at her, it felt as though there's nothing that she would want to bother herself with. I know that, people say aging is tough and aging doesn't look good all the time. But in her case, it was very calming. It was very soothing. Everything feels sorted. There's nothing to worry about, is how she felt or how she made the other person who looked at her feel like. Next up, that's about the grandmother. We are going to mark the graph of the friendship between the grandson, which is KHUSHWANT Singh, and the grandmother. Okay, how was their friendship, or what was the bond between them? Of course, they were best friends at home. They were amigos, okay? She used to wake him up every morning, bathe him, feed him, get his bag ready. And most importantly, there's a little sweet thing that happens over here. She used to sing in a monotonous way every day, the prayers in a monotonous way every day, just so that he could pick it up. Like when she woke him up or when she was bathing him, she used to sing the monotonous prayer just so that, hoping that he would pick it up. But our grandson, on the other hand, was nowhere interested in that. He would be like, he loved listening to her. On the contrary, he just loved listening to her. And that is the reason he was okay with her singing the prayers every single day. He was least bothered about picking up the prayer and starting to sing along. No way. He just loved his grandmother singing, and that's what he enjoyed and cherished. Okay. So now what did they do together? They were good friends. His parents, who were in the city, had left him with his grandmother. So that is the reason they both stayed together in the village. Then she woke him up, got him ready to school every single day. And about the prayer, we got to know what was happening, that little incident. And what was in his bag. This is very important. In his bag, he had a slate, a yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, a red pen. All of this, a slate, a yellow chalk, earthen ink pot, which is an ink pot made out of mud, and a red pen, all of this would be bundled and given to him when he went to school. Now, for breakfast, what did they have? They had thick stale chapatis. Okay, on top of the chapatis, they had butter and sugar spread on them. For breakfast, they had thick stale chapatis. There was butter and sugar spread on the thick stale chapatis. Okay. That is how they were at home. This is the graph of their friendship at home. That's the starting point for us. Next up, amigos to the school and back. Now, what are you talking? You being able to go to school with your grandparents every single day. Isn't that an amazing opportunity? Like, have you ever gone to the school, except for the special occasions, of course, have you gone to the school with your grandparents? That's an amazing opportunity, right? Now, this guy over here had that amazing opportunity to go to school every single day with his grandmother. But why? Now, the school that he went to was attached to the temple. Outside the temple, when the grandson sat, the priest taught them the alphabets and prayers. All the students would sit in a row and they would be taught the alphabets and the prayers. While that happened, the grandmother went inside. She used to sit inside and read all the scriptures. She would study all the scriptures. And she was assured that the grandson is outside learning all his alphabets and the prayers. Now, there's something also really sweet. Again, there's plenty of sweet moments in this warm collection, of course. When they went to the school or to the village temple, she also carried some thick stale chapatis that she had made. But why? It was for the dogs, the street dogs. On their way back from the school, when both grandson and grandmother would return from the school, they would feed these chapatis on their way back home to the village dogs. Okay? And my God, how the dogs fought for these chapatis, of course. So in the school as well, they were amigos and they had best time together. Next up, there is a turning point. Now, this is something really sad. Every story, story that is going in a good flow always has something bad that happens, and there is a turning point in the story. Now, what is the turning point of this story? If we try to understand, the parents who were there in the city, who are KHUSHWANT Singh's parents, they called for both the grandson. They sent a word to the grandson, of course their son, who is the grandmother's grandson, both of them to come to the city and settle down in the city with them. Now, what is the problem here? What is the turning point, ma'am? You may ask, what is the problem? They are going to stay together. Well, not really. There's a little disturbance that happens. Although they stayed in the same room, she could not accompany him to the English school on a motor bus. To the English school, only KHUSHWANT Singh went. Okay? And there were no street dogs to feed. He had to go on a motor bus to the English school while she sat at home. Now, at this point, she didn't have friends. No dogs, no grandson. Then in the picture, we have the sparrows. She finds new friends. Okay? Don't you think this old woman over here is such rebel? I mean, like, she's rebel in her own way. Whatever that life throws at her, she accepted. She's like, if this is what life is giving me, let me accept it in my own way. She did not sit and cry over the fact that there's no dogs in the city, my grandson is not spending time with me. Instead, she made new friends. Okay, she started breaking these breadcrumbs into small pieces and started feeding them to the birds around, and they would like sit all over her, on her hands, on her head, and she wouldn't like shush them away. She wouldn't be angry at them, although she would just treat them with frivolous rebukes, which is like yelling at them or being angry at them, but in a sweet way. She started spending time with the sparrows, of course. But although they stayed in the same room, they couldn't accompany each other to the English school, and there were no dogs. Eventually, they really saw less of each other, except for the fact that they stayed in the same room. They really saw there was very minimal interaction that was happening, and they could no longer be study buddies. Okay, she could no longer go to the school with him. They were no longer the study buddies. Next up, again. Now, what was the grandmother feeling? The grandmother with the English school was unhappy with two important things. What were they? The first one being the lack of teachings about God and scripture. What do we know about the grandmother? She is a very spiritualistic, religious person. She believes in God. Now, the English school did not teach anything about God or the scriptures of religion. This disturbed the grandmother very much. And the second thing being music. There was a problem with music. Now, our grandmother is a lady whose behavior towards or whose perspective towards music is as such. She associated music with filth. She associated music with, something that the people from good families don't involve or indulge themselves into. But when she got to know that KHUSHWANT Singh is being offered music lessons in the school, it was her disapproval that we get to see. Not in a violent way. She did not like throw things around and be all violent about it. She became silent. I mean, I know that you all know that silence is the most powerful thing. She just decided to stay quiet and express her unhappiness about it. Now, that's also a major turning point, is it not? Next up, the common link of friendship was snapped. Okay, now what is the common link of any relationship for that matter? The common link is to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to express your feelings, and to be able to be next to each other for that matter is the common link of any relationship. Over here, as I told, they used to share the same room. Now, as KHUSHWANT Singh moved to the university, they could no longer stay in the same room. He wanted privacy. He moved to another room. Okay? Now, there's no common room sharing between the old study buddies, former study buddies, as we can call them. The grandmother accepted this as well. Such a strong lady. She accepted this as well. She accepted her loneliness with resignation. अब अगर जिंदगी को मुझे यही देना है तो ये भी ठीक है. She was like that. Okay. Then she hardly left her spinning wheel. She spent her entire day on the spinning wheel or with her new friends. Who are they? The sparrows, of course. The most happiest day or the most happiest hour of her life afterwards was with the sparrows when she fed them the breadcrumbs. Okay? While feeding the breadcrumbs, and she never shooed them away. Clear? Now, moving forward, a broad space separating the mates. What is a broad space? It's abroad. Now, KHUSHWANT Singh gets an opportunity after completing his university education to move to abroad for how many years? For 5 long years. Okay? I mean, now think of what will happen to the grandmother. First moving to the city and then separate rooms, no accompanying to the school or going to the school together. Now he is moving to foreign for 5 long years. But our grandmother was not even sentimental. She was not being a crybaby about it. She accepted that as well. Such in-depth acceptance and understanding she has about everything that life is throwing at her, okay? And even the grandson, of course. She went to drop him to the railway station. There were no emotional talks, there were no crying, and all of that did not happen. But there is something really warm and really, this is something I want you all to be etched in your memories. And that is when she went up to him and she kissed him on his forehead. There were no talks. It was so much more done with so much less that was said. There was no talking. But a little act like this one, he cherished it very much. A kiss on his forehead, he cherished it. I mean, that was enough for the 5 years that he is going to be away from her. After 5 years, let's see what will happen. Let's fast forward and see what will happen, okay? Welcoming the homecoming. KHUSHWANT Singh is finally coming home back. Now, what has happened to the grandmother? What's with the grandmother? He says, nothing. Nothing has happened to the grandmother. She had not grown a day older. She came to the railway station just like she had done before. She came, she picked him up, and it was the same. She had like crisscross of wrinkles running through all over her face from one end to the other end, with her white snowy hair like a snow-capped mountain in the winter landscape. All of it was the same. Nothing had changed about the grandmother. She was still always lost in her prayers, constantly chanting the beads, telling the prayers. Even when she hugged him, he could hear her singing the prayer. She had still no time to talk with anybody, okay? She had no time for words, and her happiest day, again, her happiest moment of the day were again with the sparrows. Now, she can't let go of her friends that were there for her in her tough times, can she? No, right? So she spent her day feeding the sparrows, and can't deny that KHUSHWANT Singh was a little jealous that he mentions this. Even on the day of his return, her happiest moments were still with the sparrows, he says. Now, she fed them longer that day with same frivolous rebukes. Little angry, sweet yellings for the birds, the sparrows. Now, a change like never before. Everything was fine until now. What is happening? There's a change that you need to notice. Something that has never happened before. What is it? By the evening, what did the grandmother do? She collected a couple of ladies from the neighborhood, aunties from the neighborhood, and she took a dilapidated drum, a sagging drum, and she started beating the drum and dancing around with all the neighboring ladies. And she, for the very first time, underline, she was not praying. She had kept the beads, the rosaries away. Now, that is something really unusual for her to do that. She was constantly singing, dancing. She was happy about her grandson's arrival, and she did not bother to pray that day. But after that, she fell sick. Okay? And a doctor had to be called. Now, she collected the women, took the sagging drum and started hitting it. The next morning, she was ill. Although the doctor assured her that it is just a fever and it would go away, the grandmother thought otherwise. She felt that for the very first time, I actually wasted my time on something else rather than praying. Now, is it not a mistake that I have done? Is what she, started thinking about, started reciprocating the whole thing. Now, she ignored everyone after that. She literally said, everyone, you just be in the corner, and she took her beads. She started praying again. She decided that something is wrong, and she wanted to resort all her time on praying and chanting the beads and telling her prayer, nothing else. Although everybody tried to talk to her, wanted to know if she's okay, what she's feeling, but she was like, no, I need to pray and let me do the same. But once when she was completely lost in praying, before one could say or before one could even realize, imagine that, is she all right or what is happening? The rosary holding hands, the hands which held the rosary, it slipped. It was lifeless. The rosaries fell down. The beads fell down. because they did not and no longer had the energy to hold it, or no longer had the life to hold on to it. What happened? Soon before anybody realized, paleness spread all over her body and she had passed away. Before anybody could realize, before anybody could see, she was gone. And I mean, this is a very sad note to end on, right? I started off with being very energetic and happy about things, but this is what life looks like. Now, there's something else. The absence definitely would haunt, right? For us who have known her for some 15 to 20 minutes, of course, the idea of her, how she looked, how she behaved, how sweet she was, of course, just like any of your grandparents, how she woke him up, bathed him, fed him, wanted him to have discipline, be a good child. All of that was so sweet, and we ourselves get connected to her so much. Now, to them who have known her for so many years, more than 20 years, how would it feel? Her absence would definitely haunt, right? But as the custom goes, that day she was covered with red shroud. A red cloth was put on the dead body. Later on, when she was being carried to the cremation ground, in the courtyard between the gate and the house, something very, I don't know how to name it, something very sweet, something very strangely beautiful, as juxtaposed as it may sound, something strangely beautiful happened. And they say that animals and birds are the most emotional beings than the human beings as well. Here, the sparrows, thousands of sparrows surrounded her, and there was a lot of chirruping, there was a lot of noise. It was as though it was a cry of pain that they expressed on her departure. And of course, at the same time, Khushwant Singh's mother runs inside, tries to get some breadcrumbs in order to scatter the sparrows. But when the breadcrumbs were spilled, the sparrows were least bothered. They did not even look, they did not have time to even look at the breadcrumbs. All they cared for was about this woman who spent time with them so warmly every single day, who fed them with so much love every single day. She's gone. She's not going to be around anymore, and there can be no other person like her. They just flew away in silence, just like how she did. Whatever pain that life threw at her, she accepted it with a lot of courage and with a lot of silence at the same time. The same way the sparrows flew away with silence, expressing their grief, expressing their pain. Now that is what we get from this lesson. Okay? To wrap up on this lesson, how the grandmother was. For the past 20 years, Khushwant Singh had known her for. She was an old lady, of course, with crisscross wrinkles running all over her face and with wavy white hair on her head. Wearing spotless white, she used to hobble around the house with one hand on her waist. Like this, she used to hobble. And how were the amigos at home? She used to wake him up, bathe him, get him ready to school, go to the school with him. Then on their way back, they used to feed the dogs. And then what happened afterwards? A turning point, a very important turning point happens. That is when they moved to the city. They were no longer study buddies. He had to go to the English school on a motor bus where the grandmother could not accompany him. That's what happened. And later on, he also got a separate room when he moved to the university. But she made new friends, which were the sparrows, of course. She spent her time feeding the sparrows every day, and those were her happiest moments. Then he moves to abroad. We got to know about how the grandmother looks. We picturized her, the graph of the friendship, how they were friends when they went to the school and at home. What was the turning point? Them moving to the city with their parents. The common link of friendship being snapped, which is them getting the separate rooms. He gets his own room when he moves to university. And then he goes to abroad for 5 long years. But the grandmother decides to resort her time telling the prayers, constantly chanting. Okay. When he comes home, something unusual happens. She started beating the drums, collecting all the neighborhood women and dancing with them. But then she passed away the next morning, and her absence haunts everyone. So that's what we have learned today from this chapter. But I would say there is something more. Why do you have this chapter? Why do you have to study about it? Of course, for the exams and marks. But there are some takeaways beyond the exams and marks that I'm sure when Khushwant Singh penned it down, he wanted you to take all of this away with you for your life. Now, what is it? The first one being, make time for your loved ones. Now, I'm sure you all are in your adolescence and you have so much to deal with, so many emotional, behavioral things that you have to sort out with. But do make time for your loved ones. Try to get time from your loved ones as well. Then sensitize yourself to the changes around you, whatever changes that is happening within you, whatever changes that is happening in your environment. Be sensitive to it, be aware of it. That will help you in taking time but acting before it is too late. Take time before doing something or saying something. Don't do it something out of impulse. Just say something. Take time, but not too much. Something that you could have said it before and gotten it done with. Don't take too much time. Do take time, but not too much. Most importantly, at the end, let people know that they matter to you. I promise you, to the world around you that you live in, if you give out nothing but love, it would give back the same. It would give back love, and nothing but love. Okay? On that note, we end this chapter of ours, which is named The Portrait of a Lady by KHUSHWANT Singh. I'm sure you all had a great time learning this lesson and having your takeaways beyond the exams and marks. Whatever doubts that you have, go through the textbooks, read it with keen interest, deep dive into your textbook and be ready with all the questions that you have to pose. On that note, I'll see you all in the next class. Have a good time.